Hello everyone. Our topic this week is construction materials. And specifically, we're going to talk about how those materials are represented in print sets. So for each of these common materials, wood, concrete, masonry, and metal, we'll talk about how they are shown in plans, elevations, sections, and details. And before we get started, I'd like you to pull out your textbook and turn to the appendix on page 520 and 521. You'll want to follow along with these symbols in the chart. The first material we're going to talk about is wood, and we'll start out looking at wood walls in a plan. It's very simple. They typically look like two solid parallel lines. But what if there's multiple wall types in your project? Maybe there's new walls and existing walls. Maybe there's interior walls and exterior walls. Maybe some walls are using insulation and some are not. All right. You can differentiate between these different wall types by filling them in with a pattern or with a solid black color. Right. That works if there's only one or two or three types of walls. Or in a more complex project, there's going to be a wall type schedule or partition type details. You'll see these later in the course, but here's a little preview of what they might look like. On the right, we have 4 different partition types from the Veterinary Center set of prints. And on the left is a little snip of the plan. You can see that wall type B is tagged on these walls that just look like 2 lines. Moving on, let's talk about wood in elevation. So when we're looking at the elevation or a face of a building, the wood wall structure, the studs, are typically not shown. All right. Instead, we're going to see whatever finish or siding or exterior is applied to those walls. Where you are going to see wood is in the trim, and you can see that here in the brick veneer residence prints. They've called out the wood trim along the roof, wood louvers, and there is some wood trim around these windows. Every once in a while, you might see a piece of finish wood, all right, such as some fancy wood paneling on an interior wall, all right, and you might see those illustrated with wood grain. Let's talk about wood in sections and details. All right. Any wood structural member in a section, and when I talk about structural member, I'm meaning something like a 2x4 or a 2x10. All right. It's shown by a solid outline, usually a rectangle. Right, and it's marked with 2 diagonal lines and an X. We see that right here in this illustration. Right. Notice that when you draw a wood member like this, even though we call it a 2x4, all right, we would actually draw it to the actual size of 1.5 by 3.5. All right, we don't draw the member at its nominal size. We draw it at its actual size. Now, sometimes you can see a wood member in your section or detail, but you're not cutting through it. It's actually running parallel to your section cut. And in that case, we're seeing it in face view, and here's the example here, and we're just looking at the side of that member, so you see it in 2 parallel lines. So those were structural pieces of wood. What about finish wood? Well, a section through a finished piece of wood is shown as a solid outline filled with an indication of wood grain. All right. Wood grain is diagrammatic. It doesn't have to be, beautifully drawn to scale. All right. But they are typically freehand lines, and you see an example of that right here. What's finish wood? It's anything used for a decorative or aesthetic purpose. Crown molding is an example, or a chair rail. One more type of wood I want to talk about, and that's plywood. Plywood is going to be shown as, because it's a sheet product, when you cut through it, it's long and thin. And then there is a pattern indicating the plies. Take a look at it right here. And it actually varies depending on scale. So you would draw the thickness of the plywood to scale, and it depends if you're zoomed way in. All right, you can actually very accurately draw those plies. If you are zoomed further out, you really can't. So it depends. Here's a chance to practice. I'd like you to go ahead and pause the video here and take a look and see how many different wood members and different types of wood you can identify in these two images. Let's move on to our next construction material, and that is concrete. Starting out with concrete and plan. It doesn't really have a hatch or a symbol. All right. For example, here in the concrete foundation slab, it's going to show up just as an edge outline. The same holds true for concrete in elevation. It rarely has any hatch pattern or symbol. Just like in the plan, it's going to be shown just as an outline of how far the concrete extends. Concrete cut in section is a different story, however. It has a very distinctive hatch pattern. It combines some dots, some little circles, and some small triangles. This kind of agglomeration of different symbols is supposed to represent the sand and gravel bits in that concrete mixture. All right, and it's very distinctive. Also, the rebar, let's take a look right here. All right, is typically shown as a solid dot within the concrete. Also, as you take a look at this particular example, see if you can note the hatch pattern that's showing the earth or the dirt. All right. Notice how the grade line, which is the edge of the earth, is shown as a single, very heavy, dark line. And see if you can identify all of the different kinds of structural lumber and the plywood in this particular detail. Now there's lots of other things to look at in this particular detail, so let's start by looking at the wood structural members. You can see one of them here, another one here. They are rectangles with that X symbol in the middle. That means we're cutting through those structural members. But here's one, this joist right here. That one is in face view. All right, we're looking at the side of the joist, and so that's why it doesn't have the X. On the side over here is the plywood. And you can see that we are seeing some of those plies as a hatch pattern there. Also take a look at the hatch pattern for the earth. This is the dirt outside of our concrete foundation here. And the grade, which is kind of the edge of the earth, it's the part that you stand on, right, is shown as one single heavy line. We've just covered wood and concrete. I'm going to pause here and we'll talk about masonry and metal in the next video. Thanks, everyone.